sleeping in ancient times. Calm history for sleep. Let everything slow down now. Let the pace of your day release itself from your body, from your shoulders and your hands and the space behind your eyes where the last of the day's thoughts are still moving. Let them move and let them pass, like clouds crossing a wide, pale sky, without holding on to any of them, without following any of them anywhere. There is nothing required of you in this moment. There is nowhere to be and nothing to decide and nothing to remember. There is only this voice and this story and a journey back through time to a place so ancient and so beautiful and so completely itself that arriving there, even now, even across a distance of more than 3,000 years, feels less like traveling and more like returning. We are going to Egypt, not the Egypt of the modern world, not the Egypt of the cities and the highways and the tourist boats on the river. We are going much further back than that, back through 33 centuries, to the year 1400 BC, to the height of the New Kingdom, to a moment when Egypt was the most powerful and most enduring civilization on the surface of the earth, when the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty sat upon their thrones at Thebes and governed an empire that stretched from the Sudan in the south to the borders of Mesopotamia in the north. Close your eyes and let the world around you begin to change. Feel the warmth first. Not the moderate warmth of a temperate morning, but the full, generous, entirely serious warmth of an Egyptian summer day arriving. The sun has been above the horizon for perhaps 2 hours, and it is already present with a completeness that leaves no ambiguity about its intentions. The air is warm and dry and entirely clear, the kind of clarity that only exists in desert climates, where the atmosphere contains almost none of the moisture that softens and diffuses the light in wetter places. Every edge is sharp here, every shadow precise, the world rendered in the clear, strong contrast of a place that the sun governs absolutely and without apology. The ground beneath your feet is warm, a path of packed earth and flat stone running along the edge of the cultivation. On your left, the fields. On your right, the desert begins almost immediately, a hard, pale line where the cultivated earth stops and the sand starts. Abrupt and absolute, as clear as a boundary drawn with a ruler. This line is one of the fundamental facts of Egyptian life, the two lands, as the Egyptians call them, the Black Land and the Red Land, the Kemet and the Deshret. The Black Land is the narrow strip of fertile earth on either side of the river, dark and rich and extraordinarily productive, renewed every year by the Nile's annual flood, which deposits a fresh layer of dark silt across the fields before receding, leaving behind a soil so fertile that it will produce 2 and sometimes 3 harvests in a single year. In a world where most agricultural land requires careful management and occasional rest, the Nile Valley is an anomaly, a gift so consistent and so generous that it shaped not just the agriculture, but the entire worldview of the people who received it. The Red Land is everything else. The desert, the sand and the rock and the blinding, featureless expanse that surrounds the fertile valley on both sides, hot and dry and inhospitable. The land of chaos and foreigners and the dead, where the tombs are cut into the rock on the western bank of the river, where the sun goes each evening to make its journey through the underworld. The river is to your east. You cannot see it from where you stand. The cultivation and the palm trees and the low mud brick walls of the village between you and the water obscure the view, but you can feel its presence in the moisture in the air, in the quality of the light above the tree line, in the sound of water birds somewhere beyond the palms. and in the simple foundational knowledge that in this landscape, everything comes from the river. Everything depends on the river. Everything is oriented toward the river. The Nile is not simply a geographical feature to the people who live along its banks. It is a living thing, a divine thing. The God happy in his annual flood, the source of all abundance, the reason for everything. The sky above you is a color that has no equivalent in northern latitudes, a deep, saturated blue that begins at the horizon and deepens as your eyes move upward, becoming at its zenith directly above you, a blue so intense and so pure that it seems almost solid, almost like a substance rather than an absence. The blue of a sky that contains no clouds and no haze, and nothing between you and the infinite depth of space above it, but clear, warm, desert air. In the palm trees along the field edge, doves are calling, a soft, continuous sound, low and repetitive and entirely peaceful, the sound of birds that have been calling in the palm trees along the Nile for as long as there have been palm trees and doves and a river for them to live beside. The smell of the morning is clean and warm and slightly dusty, the dry mineral smell of the desert edge mixing with the richer, more complex smell of the cultivation of wet earth and green growing things, and the particular organic warmth of fields that are both fertile and warm. Beneath it, the smell of cook fires already burning in the village, of bread baking on clay plates over open hearths. Egypt in 1400 BC is at the height of its power and its confidence. The great temples at Karnak and Luxor are under continuous construction and embellishment. The craftspeople of Thebes are producing work of extraordinary beauty and precision. The trade routes that connect Egypt to Nubia in the south and to the Levant in the north are active and productive. The granaries are full. This is a civilization that has been refining itself for more than 1,000 years, that has developed systems of agriculture and administration and record-keeping and religious practice so sophisticated and so well adapted to their environment that they will persist, largely unchanged, for another 1,000 years after this morning. It is a civilization of extraordinary stability, extraordinary continuity. The same prayers spoken in the same temples in the same way. The same agricultural calendar followed in the same fields. The same rituals performed at the same festivals, season after season, generation after generation. The continuity itself a kind of achievement, a deliberate, carefully maintained argument that the world is orderly, and that order is good, and that the maintenance of order is the highest human calling. We are not going to the temples tonight. We are not going to the royal court at Thebes or the workshops of the craftspeople who are painting the walls of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. We are going to a small farming village on the western bank of the Nile, a few miles south of the great city, to a community of perhaps 200 people who grow barley and emmer wheat in the dark soil of the floodplain, who fish the river and tend small kitchen gardens and keep animals and grind grain and bake bread and manage the practical daily business of feeding themselves and contributing their portion to the vast, smooth-running machine of Egyptian civilization. It is an ordinary village. It has no remarkable history, no famous inhabitants, no monuments that will survive, but it has something that the temples and the monuments do not have. It has the particular, irreplaceable texture of daily life. The smell of bread baking in the morning, the sound of the grinding stone, the feel of warm mud beneath bare feet on the path to the river. It has a woman named Nefru. Her name means beautiful. She is a grain farmer and a bread maker. She has lived in this village all her life. She knows every family in it and every field around it and every bend in the canal that connects the village to the river. Her life is ordinary by the standards of her time and place, and it is, by almost any other measure, a life of quiet completeness, of work that is meaningful and labor that is real, and days that begin and end with the same reliable rhythms. But we are not quite there yet. First, let us arrive properly. Let the warmth of the Egyptian morning settle onto your skin. Let the smell of the river and the fields and the cook fires reach you. Let the sound of the doves in the palm trees find you where you stand. And let this ancient, beautiful, entirely extraordinary world open itself around you, gently, without urgency, as it has opened itself every morning for 3,000 years, as it opens itself now. You arrive at the edge of the village just as the sky is beginning to change. It is early, earlier than early, that particular hour that belongs neither to night nor to morning, but exists as a kind of threshold between them, a pause before the day commits to beginning. The darkness is not complete. To the east, beyond the wide silver ribbon of the Nile and the low flat fields on the far bank, the sky above the distant cliffs has begun to soften into a deep, luminous indigo, as if a lamp of extraordinary gentleness is being turned up very slowly. Somewhere far below the horizon, the stars overhead are still present, still clear, scattered across the darkness in their thousands, with a density and brightness that no city dweller of any later age will ever quite see. Because there is nothing here to diminish them, no competing light, no haze of industry, only the clean, dry air of the desert and the wide open sky above the river valley. You stand still for a moment and simply look up. The stars of Egypt are unhurried and magnificent. The ancient Egyptians have named them and mapped them, built their greatest monuments in careful alignment with them. Standing here beneath them now, it is entirely possible to understand why. They are not decoration. They are presence. They are the ceiling of the world, and the world beneath them feels, in this early hour, very small and very safe and very held. The village lies before you, arranged along a low rise of ground just above the level of the floodplain. The houses are built from mud brick, that particular Egyptian building material so perfectly suited to this landscape. It seems less constructed than grown from it. The bricks are made from the Nile mud itself, dark and rich and dense, mixed with chopped straw and dried in the sun until they are solid and cool to the touch, the color of the earth they came from. The walls of the houses are thick, much thicker than they might appear from a distance, built this way not for grandeur, but for wisdom. Thick walls keep the interior cool through the long burning heat of the Egyptian day, and warm through the surprisingly cool nights that follow. Each house is low and rectangular, its flat roof edged with a low parapet, its small windows set high in the walls, angled carefully to catch the north wind that moves down the Nile Valley in the afternoons. The houses sit close together, in the companionable way of places where people have lived side by side for many generations, their walls sometimes sharing a surface, their small courtyards opening onto one another through low doorways hung with woven reed mats, moving softly in the faint pre-dawn breeze. Some of the exterior walls have been whitewashed, and these catch the first suggestion of dawn light with a pale luminosity, almost as though they are generating the light themselves from somewhere deep within the clay. Others are the natural warm brown of the dried mud, and these seem to absorb the darkness around them and hold it softly, making the white walls nearby appear even brighter by contrast. You walk slowly toward the village along a path of packed earth. The path runs parallel to the edge of the cultivation zone, that extraordinary band of dark, fertile land that lines both banks of the Nile and gives Egypt everything. You can feel the difference beneath your feet as you walk. To your right, the pale, sandy soil of the desert edge, dry and fine, shifting slightly underfoot, carrying the particular smell of hot stone and mineral emptiness, the smell of the desert at any hour. To your left, the cultivation begins, and the ground changes immediately, completely. It is dark here, almost black in the pre-dawn dimness, and it is damp, and it smells of living things, of organic richness accumulated over thousands of years of annual flooding, each flood depositing another thin, perfect layer of Nile silt on top of everything that came before. This soil is among the most fertile in the world, and even in the darkness you can sense it, a vitality in the earth, a readiness, as if the ground itself is eager to grow things. And things are growing. The barley is tall in the fields closest to the village, its long stems silvered by the faint starlight, moving in a slow collective wave when the breeze passes through them. A sound like very gentle breathing, like a room full of people sleeping peacefully. Beyond the barley, emmer wheat stands in darker rows, its heavy heads bowing slightly with their own weight. Along the path's edge, a row of date palms rises against the sky, their silhouettes unmistakable, the long straight trunk and the eruption of feathery fronds at the crown, swaying so slightly in the pre-dawn air that the movement is barely perceptible, only a whisper of sound from above. Where the fronds touch and separate and touch again, the river is close. You cannot see it from here, hidden behind a low bank of earth and a fringe of papyrus reeds. But you can feel it, a coolness in the air, a particular quality of moisture that has no equivalent anywhere away from a great river, a faint smell of silt and water and green growing things that the Egyptians have breathed every morning of their lives. And that means, simply and completely, home. Somewhere in the reeds a bird calls once, a low, liquid sound, and then falls silent. The frogs that have been singing since midnight are beginning to quieten now, their chorus thinning as the darkness thins, as though they too are preparing for the change of shift. You pass through the edge of the village and into its narrow central lane. The lane runs between two rows of houses, its floor smooth and worn and faintly warm underfoot from the previous day's sun, which the packed earth holds long into the night. On either side, the mud brick walls rise to shoulder height or above, their surfaces not entirely smooth. Here, a handprint pressed into the clay before it dried and left there, permanent and personal. There, a small painted border of blue and ochre running along the base of a wall, geometric and careful, the work of someone who wanted their home to carry a little beauty on its face. A clay pot sits outside a doorway, tall and narrow-necked, sealed with a palm leaf stopper, its surface rough and unglazed and entirely functional. Beside it, a basket woven from palm fiber leans against the wall, empty now, waiting for the morning's use. Everything is waiting. The village holds its breath in this last quiet moment before the day begins, and the smell of it surrounds you. Warm earth and dried reed and the river, and just beginning to thread its way into the morning air from somewhere nearby, the faint, promising smell of a fire being lit. Somewhere close, Nefru is already awake. You follow the smell of the fire. It leads you gently through the narrow lane, past 2 more doorways still hung with their sleeping mats, past a small pen where a pair of ducks stand motionless in the corner, their heads tucked back into their feathers, past a low wall over which the top of an acacia tree extends its flat, spreading canopy against the brightening sky. The smell of smoke is clean and dry, not the thick, heavy smoke of a large fire, but the thin, purposeful smoke of something small being coaxed carefully into life, the kind of fire that is lit with attention and patience, and a clear sense of what it is for. You stop at an open courtyard. It is not large, perhaps 10 paces across, enclosed on 3 sides by the mud brick walls of the house, and on the 4th by a low wall that separates it from the lane. The ground of the courtyard is packed earth, swept smooth and clean, and in its center, slightly to one side, a shallow clay hearth sits directly on the ground, no more than a hand's width deep, its interior holding a small arrangement of dried acacia wood and palm fiber. That is just now taking the flame being offered to it. Kneeling beside the hearth, her face turned slightly away from the first curl of smoke, is Nefru. She is a woman of perhaps 30 years. Though the Egyptian sun and the outdoor life have given her face a quality of settled, weathered calm that makes exact age difficult to assign. She could be younger, she could be older, and in either case, she carries herself with the easy, unself-conscious composure of someone who has been doing the work of her life long enough that it has become simply who she is. Her hair is dark and thick, pulled back and wrapped in a length of plain linen cloth to keep it clear of her face and the flour that will find its way onto everything before this morning is done. She wears a simple dress of undyed linen, its fabric loose and practical, belted at the waist with a strip of woven palm fiber. Her feet are bare on the cool earth of the courtyard. Her hands move with complete assurance around the small fire. She adds a piece of acacia wood, not large, just sufficient, and adjusts the arrangement with a short stick until the flame is steady and settled and committed to burning. Then she sits back slightly on her heels and watches it for a moment, not with any anxiety or impatience, simply with the attentive satisfaction of someone who has completed the first small task of the day correctly. The fire responds as she intended. It burns cleanly, steadily, with a quiet orange heart and a thin pale column of smoke that rises straight up in the still pre-dawn air before dispersing into the darkness above the courtyard wall. She rises and turns to the grain. Along the inner wall of the courtyard, a row of clay storage vessels stands in a line, tall, wide-bellied jars with narrow necks, each one sealed with a clay stopper pressed smooth and marked with a small incised symbol. These are the household's grain stores, the product of the previous harvest, the food security of the family, measured in careful portions against the long months until the next flood, the next sowing, the next harvest. Nefru knows exactly what is in each jar and approximately how long each will last, and what the ratio should be between what is eaten today and what must remain for tomorrow. This knowledge is not written anywhere. It lives in her, accumulated through years of watching her mother manage the same calculations in the same courtyard, and her mother's mother before that. She lifts the stopper from one of the jars and reaches inside, drawing out a measured amount of emmer wheat in a wide, shallow basket. The grain makes a soft, whispering sound as it falls, a dry, intimate, rustling sound, like the sound of sand moving over itself, like the sound of time passing slowly and without urgency. She carries the basket to the low grinding stone set against the wall on the courtyard's shaded side. The grinding stone is ancient, not ancient in the sense of being unused or ceremonial. It is worn smooth with use, its upper surface slightly hollowed by the repeated passage of the handstone across it. The hollow perfectly shaped to the work, as if the stone has been patiently accommodating itself to the task over many years. This is the saddle quern, the tool that turns grain into flour, and Nefru has been using it since she was old enough to kneel beside her mother and add her own small pushing weight to the handstone. She kneels before it now, settles herself into the familiar posture, knees on a folded piece of old linen, body leaning slightly forward, both hands wrapped around the smooth, rounded surface of the upper stone, and she begins. The motion is long and even and repetitive. Forward and back, forward and back. The handstone rolling over the grain with a low, steady, grinding sound that fills the courtyard completely and immediately. A sound that is ancient beyond reckoning, that has been produced in this valley since long before the first pharaoh. A sound that is as much a part of the Egyptian morning as the birds and the river and the returning light. It is not a harsh sound. It is dry and rhythmic, and in its way, deeply soothing. The sound of something being transformed, slowly and by hand, into something that will sustain life. The sky above the courtyard has been changing throughout all of this. The indigo of the early pre-dawn has shifted into a deep, saturated blue. And now that blue itself is softening at its eastern edge into something warmer. The first pale suggestion of gold appearing above the line of the distant cliffs across the river. The cliffs that mark the edge of the desert and the boundary of the known world, beyond which lie the tombs of the great ones and the vast, silent emptiness of the sand. This first gold is faint and tentative, but it is growing, and as it grows, the courtyard around you emerges more fully from the shadows, the pale clay of the walls gaining their warm daytime color, the grinding stone taking on its familiar gray-brown solidity, the fire in the clay hearth brightening as the world around it slowly brightens. A child appears in the low doorway that leads from the house into the courtyard. She is perhaps 6 or 7 years old, small and round-faced, and not entirely awake. Her linen dress slightly twisted from sleep, one hand pressed to the doorframe. She surveys the courtyard with the mild, unfocused expression of someone who has been pulled toward waking by the sounds of the morning before she was quite ready. She watches her mother at the grinding stone for a moment. Then she crosses the courtyard in her quiet, barefoot way and sits down close to the hearth, extending her small hands toward its warmth, in exactly the same gesture that every child beside every fire in every part of the world has made since fire was first discovered. She tucks her feet beneath her and watches the flames with the peaceful, unhurried attention of a child with nowhere to be and nothing asked of her yet. Nefru speaks to her without looking up from the grinding. The words are soft and brief, a morning word, an affectionate check, the kind of exchange between a mother and a child that carries more warmth in its tone than in its content. The child responds in a small, still sleepy voice, and then returns her attention to the fire. The grinding continues. The fire continues. The sky continues its slow brightening. When enough flour has accumulated in the shallow bowl beneath the grinding stone, Nefru pauses and runs the tips of her fingers through it. Pale and fine, faintly warm from the friction of the work, she assesses its texture with quiet authority. The flour is good, fine and even, with only the faintest trace of grittiness from the stone. That long experience has made simply part of the character of Egyptian bread, familiar and unremarkable. She rises and carries the flour bowl to the low mud brick working surface beside the hearth. She adds water from a clay jug, the water drawn last evening from the canal that connects the village to the river, left to settle overnight in the cool interior of the house until it is clear and clean. She adds a small piece of old dough saved from yesterday's batch, pressing it into the flour and water with her knuckles, beginning the mixing with the same slow, deliberate rhythm as the grinding, the same forward and back motion, the same quality of attention that is not hurried and not distracted, but simply and completely present. The dough forms under her hands. The courtyard smells of flour and fire, and the river carried on the morning air, and the sky above is now openly, unambiguously golden. The sun not yet visible above the cliffs, but its coming fully announced. The entire eastern sky a warm, luminous amber, reflecting down into the courtyard, touching the walls and the flour dust and the child's sleepy face with equal gentleness. The village around the courtyard is beginning to stir. Voices from a neighboring house, low and morning soft. The sound of another grinding stone starting up somewhere close. A neighbor's rhythm, slightly different from Nefru's. The two sounds weaving together across the shared wall into something that is almost musical, almost a conversation. The ducks in their pen have woken and are moving about with quiet, businesslike attention. Somewhere down by the river's edge, a heron calls once, long and resonant, and the sound of it crosses the whole width of the Nile floodplain and arrives in the courtyard like a message from the water, unhurried and complete. Nefru works the dough. Her hands know what they are doing. The morning is doing what mornings do, and the day, very gently, has begun. By the time the sun has fully cleared the eastern cliffs and begun its long, unhurried crossing of the Egyptian sky, the village has completed its transformation from sleeping to waking, in the same gradual, inevitable way that the Nile floodplain transforms each year from barren to fertile, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the patient accumulation of small changes, each one building quietly upon the last, until the whole picture is simply there, alive and warm, and entirely itself. The bread is already baked. Nefru had shaped the dough into flat rounds while the fire built its heat, pressing each one between her palms with practiced ease, before laying them onto the flat clay surface of the baking plate that sits directly over the hearth. The bread had cooked quickly. That is the nature of this kind of bread. Thin and direct, in conversation with the heat in a way that thicker loaves are not. Each round had puffed slightly as it cooked, its surface blistering in small bubbles before settling, its underside darkening to a deep, even brown, while its top remained pale and faintly dusted with the last of the flour. The smell of it baking had drifted out over the courtyard wall and into the lane, warm grain and hot clay and something faintly nutty from the emmer wheat. The smell of morning in this village, as reliable and as comforting as the sunrise itself. The family has eaten. Nefru's husband, Amenhotep, is a quiet, broad-shouldered man who works the fields with the methodical patience of someone who understands that the land gives back exactly what is put into it, and not a great deal more. He had eaten standing up, as he usually does in the morning, tearing his bread in pieces and dipping it into a small bowl of oil, pressed from the sesame seeds that grow in a narrow strip at the field's edge. He had spoken briefly about the irrigation channel that needs attention at its northern end, where the Nile silt has been building against the inner bank through the season. Nefru had listened and noted it in the way she notes most things, without great ceremony, filing it among the many details of the household and the land that she carries and manages with the same quiet authority as her grain stores. He had left for the fields as the sun was still low. Now Nefru is in the field herself. She moves along one of the wide, flat strips of cultivated land that extend back from the river's edge toward the desert margin. Her bare feet on the dark Nile soil, which is cool and faintly damp even at this hour, sinking slightly with each step in a way that feels deliberate and substantial, as if the earth is gently confirming your presence on it. She carries a short-handled hoe of acacia wood, its blade of hardened copper fitted into the wooden shaft with a linen binding that she retightened just this morning. She moves along the rows of barley with the steady, unhurried rhythm of someone who has hoed this same ground in this same way through more seasons than she can easily count. The work is simple and physical and completely absorbing. Each stroke of the hoe breaks the surface crust that the sun has baked onto the soil overnight, aerating the earth around the roots of the barley, clearing the occasional intrusion of a weed before it has the chance to establish itself. The blade makes a dry, clean sound with each stroke, a brief, decisive percussion, followed by the softer sound of the broken earth settling back. This sound carries rhythmically through the morning air, mixing with the same sounds coming from the neighboring strips, where two of Nefru's cousins work in companionable parallel, close enough for occasional conversation, but not so close as to crowd one another. You walk alongside the field and watch the village expand around you in the full morning light. The sun is generous and direct now, lying across the floodplain in long, warm sheets, making the dark soil of the fields appear almost luminous. The surface of the irrigation channels turns to lines of hammered silver running between the crops, the narrow, carefully maintained waterways that distribute the Nile's water across the cultivated land during the dry months. Date palms line the field edges, their shadows falling in long, feathery stripes across the ground. A group of white ibis has landed in the shallow water of one of the channels, standing there in its dignified, unhurried way, each bird a study in patient stillness, occasionally dipping its long, curved bill into the water and raising it again with the same measured deliberateness. Down toward the riverbank, the morning's water work is underway. Two men and an older boy work a shadoof at the water's edge. The shadoof is an elegant and ancient device, essentially a long counterbalanced pole with a bucket at one end and a heavy clay weight at the other, which allows a single person to lift water from the river and transfer it into the irrigation channels with a minimum of effort, the counterweight doing most of the physical work. The pole swings in its slow arc, down to the water, up with the full bucket, tipped into the channel, down again, over and over in a rhythm as steady and peaceful as a pendulum, the water catching the sunlight each time it pours from the bucket into the channel, in a brief, bright cascade that vanishes almost immediately into the waiting earth. The sound of the water carries clearly in the warm air. You turn away from the fields and drift back toward the village center, where a different kind of morning activity is underway. At the widest point of the main lane, where two paths meet beneath the generous shade of a large sycamore fig tree, a small informal market has gathered. Not a market in the formal sense of stalls and commerce, but the daily exchange of goods and conversation that is the social and economic heartbeat of any small, self-sufficient community. A woman spreads a cloth on the ground and arranges upon it the things she has available for exchange: dried lentils in a small clay bowl, a bunch of fresh onions pulled that morning, 2 small bundles of dried herbs tied with grass, a handful of blue faience beads worn smooth from long handling. Beside her, another woman has brought a clay pot sealed with beeswax, containing rendered fat from the family's last slaughtered duck. She and the first woman are already deep in a negotiation conducted entirely without currency, in the Egyptian fashion of this era, measuring value in units of grain and oil and labor and reciprocal obligation that everyone present understands implicitly. There is no hurry in any of this. The conversations that accompany the transactions are at least as important as the transactions themselves. News about a neighboring family's new child, observations about the state of the barley in the southern fields, a shared opinion about the taste of this season's dates compared to last year's, a story about something one of the children did that is still being laughed about 2 days later. The voices are warm and unhurried, moving between exchange and laughter and silence and exchange again, in the fluid, easy way of people who have known each other since birth and expect to know each other until death, and find this fact entirely comfortable. Nefru passes through on her way back from the fields for the midday rest. She stops briefly at the cloth market, exchanges a few words, accepts a small bunch of fresh coriander pressed upon her by a neighbor, with the particular insistence of someone who has more than they need and wants the pleasure of giving some away. She tucks it into the fold of her belt and continues homeward, the coriander releasing its sharp, clean fragrance with each step, a smell so immediate and vivid it seems almost to have color. Back in the courtyard, the midday meal is simple and taken in the shade. The remaining bread from the morning, a bowl of lentils cooked since early morning in a small clay pot nestled among the lower coals of the hearth, seasoned with onions and cumin, and the fresh coriander now torn and scattered across the surface in rough pieces. A handful of dates, their skins wrinkled and sweet, their flesh dense and deeply satisfying in the way that only sun-dried fruit achieves. Water from the clay jug, cool and clean, tasting faintly of the clay itself, which is not unpleasant. It is simply the taste of water in this place, the taste Nefru has known since the first time she was old enough to drink from a cup. She sits in the shade of the courtyard wall, her back against the warm mud brick, her legs stretched out before her on the swept earth. The child is beside her, eating dates with the slow, concentrated attention that children bring to foods they particularly enjoy, examining each one before eating it, as though verifying its credentials. The courtyard is warm and still. The fire has burned down to a low, patient ember. A gecko moves along the top of the wall in a series of small, precise adjustments, pauses, and then is motionless, as though it has always been part of the wall and always will be. Above, the sky is a blue so deep and so complete that it seems almost solid. The particular Egyptian midday sky that painters of this era mixed lapis lazuli and azurite to approximate, and never quite captured. Nefru closes her eyes for a moment in the shade. The village settles into its midday quiet, and the Nile moves in its endless, unhurried way beyond the fields, and the sun continues its crossing of the sky, and everything is warm and still and exactly as it should be. The sun begins its descent toward the western desert in the middle of the afternoon, and the light over the Nile Valley changes in a way that no other light in the world quite matches. It is not simply that the sky turns golden, though it does, deeply and completely, a gold that has no coolness or reservation in it, but is warm all the way through, like something heated from within rather than lit from without. It is that everything the light touches seems to respond to it, seems to open slightly toward it, the way a flower opens toward the morning, as if the whole landscape has been waiting all day for this particular quality of illumination, and is now finally receiving it with quiet gratitude. The dark soil of the fields deepens to an almost reddish brown. The pale mud brick walls of the village take on the color of honey. The surface of the Nile, wide and slow and eternally patient, becomes a sheet of hammered copper stretching from bank to bank, broken only where a duck lands in a brief white flutter, or where the papyrus reeds at the water's edge cast their long feathery shadows across the shallows. You stand at the field's edge and watch the light change, and it asks nothing of you. Nefru has returned to the fields after the midday rest, working through the hottest part of the afternoon with the steady, economical movement of someone who has learned to labor in heat without fighting it, moving more slowly than the morning, conserving what needs to be conserved, pausing occasionally in the shade of a palm to drink from the clay water vessel she carries, and to look out across the river with the mild, contented expression of a person whose thoughts are not troubling them. The afternoon work is lighter than the morning, checking the irrigation channels for blockages, gathering a small bundle of emmer wheat from the edge of the field where the stalks have dried early, tying it with a twist of grass, and setting it with the others that lean against the field boundary wall. Now the day's field work is done. She walks back toward the village in the long evening light, her shadow stretching out before her across the dark soil, in an elongated shape that reaches almost to the next row of palms. She carries the small bundle of wheat under one arm and the hoe over her shoulder. She walks the way people walk at the end of a day of honest physical work, not tired exactly, or not only tired, but filled with the particular settled heaviness of a body that has been used well and is ready now for stillness. Around her, the fields are emptying. The other figures, who have been distributed across the cultivated land all day, are converging, by ones and twos, toward the village. Men returning from the further fields, women from the kitchen gardens closer to the houses, the older boy from the shadoof at the river's edge, moving now with the unhurried looseness of someone whose work shift has ended and whose body knows it. They pass one another on the paths between the fields with brief words and small gestures of acknowledgement. The easy exchanges of people whose days run in parallel and who have seen each other at intervals throughout all of it. The village receives them quietly. Back in the courtyard, Nefru sets down the hoe against the wall in its accustomed place and stands for a moment with her hands resting at her sides, simply breathing, feeling the difference between the open space of the fields and the enclosed warmth of the courtyard, which holds the day's heat in its mud brick walls and releases it slowly now into the cooling evening air. The fire in the clay hearth has been kept alive through the afternoon by the child, who takes this responsibility with great seriousness and has fed it small pieces of acacia wood at careful intervals. It burns now with a low, warm confidence. That makes the courtyard feel complete and inhabited. Nefru kneels beside the hearth and begins preparing the evening meal. She adds to the fire and sets a clay cooking pot above it on the 3 stones that serve as the hearth's cooking support, then adds water and a measure of dried lentils from the storage jar, a generous pinch of salt, 2 onions halved and laid and cut side down, a piece of dried fish wrapped in palm leaf that has been soaking since midday in a small bowl of water. The smell of the onions meeting the hot pot rises immediately and fills the courtyard, sweet and sharp at once, deeply savory. The smell of dinner beginning its patient transformation from raw ingredients into something warm and unified and nourishing. She grinds a little more flour while the pot works on the fire. The sound of the grinding stone joins the sound of the cooking, the low rhythmic scrape, and the soft bubbling of the pot. These 2 sounds together, one dry, one liquid, Create a kind of domestic music that is as old as settled life in the Nile Valley and feels, in this evening hour, as natural and as inevitable as the river moving outside the village. The sky above the courtyard has deepened to a spectacular amber rose, the color intensifying by the minute as the sun approaches the desert horizon to the west. The flat rooftops of the houses glow in it. The palm fronds catch it and hold it in their feathery edges. The child has climbed to the low roof of the house, a common thing. The rooftop as living space, as lookout, as the coolest place to be in a hot climate once the sun begins to lose its direct force. She sits up there with her legs dangling over the edge, watching the sky change with the uncomplicated delight of a child for whom the sunset has not yet become ordinary. Amenhotep returns from the far fields as the sun touches the horizon. He comes through the courtyard gate with the unhurried gait of a man whose day has been long and physical and is now satisfyingly complete. He sets down his tools and washes his hands and face from the water jar beside the gate, the water darkening as it falls to the earth with the good darkness of field soil. He dries his face with a piece of linen hanging from a peg in the wall and turns to the fire with the expression of a person following the smell of cooking with genuine and uncomplicated pleasure. The family eats together in the courtyard as the stars begin to appear. It is a simple meal eaten simply. The lentil stew ladled into clay bowls, the bread from the morning torn and used to scoop from the bowl in the Egyptian fashion, a few dates, and a small cup of thin beer brewed from barley, its flavor mild and slightly sour and deeply refreshing, in the way that only a drink perfectly suited to its climate and its moment can be. They eat without ceremony, but not without contentment. The conversation moving in the unhurried way of people who have been in each other's company all day and have no need to fill the silence, who are comfortable letting the meal be mostly the meal and the evening be mostly the evening. After the bowls are set aside, they sit a while longer. The courtyard is cooling now, the mud brick walls releasing their stored warmth into the night air in long, slow waves. This warmth mixes with the cooling air from the river in a way that is completely comfortable. The temperature having found, as it always does at this hour in this valley, its most pleasant equilibrium. The fire has burned to a low glow. The child is asleep against her father's side, her breathing slow and even, her face entirely smooth and untroubled in the firelight. The village beyond the courtyard wall has grown quiet. The lane outside is empty. The last voices of the evening have faded into the still air and dissolved. Somewhere near the river, a frog begins its night song, and then another, and then gradually the whole dark edge of the water is alive with the sound of them, an ancient, continuous sound that has accompanied every evening in this valley since long before the first house was built on its banks, a sound that means, without any translation required, that the day is over and the night has arrived and everything is as it should be. Nefru banks the coals of the fire with a careful hand. She covers them with a thin layer of ash to keep them slow and alive through the night, a gesture as familiar and as necessary as any she has made today. The last small act of tending before rest. She looks at the banked fire for a moment, satisfied, unhurried, and then she looks up at the sky above the courtyard, which is now fully dark and fully magnificent. The stars return to their deep, unwavering positions above the valley. She breathes in the night air, river and earth, and the faint sweetness of the cooling barley fields, and her face in the starlight is entirely, quietly at peace. Night settles over the Nile Valley the way the river itself settles after the flood, completely, gently, and with a feeling of something having arrived that was always going to arrive. That was always the natural end of the sequence, as inevitable and as welcome as the harvest that follows the planting. The sun has been gone for some time now. Its departure left a long, slow afterglow in the western sky above the desert, a deep rose that faded through amber into a transparent green, and then into the darkening blue that is the last color the sky holds before it releases itself entirely to the night. That transition is complete now. The sky above the village is fully dark, fully open, and what it reveals in that darkness is extraordinary. The stars over the Nile Valley at night are beyond counting. They extend from horizon to horizon in a great luminous river of their own, the Milky Way arching overhead in a dense, softly glowing band that the ancient Egyptians see as the celestial counterpart of the Nile itself. Two rivers running parallel, one of water and one of light, both flowing from the deep south toward the northern delta, both sustaining life in their own way. The individual stars are sharp and unwavering in the dry desert air, each one perfectly itself, and together they produce a light that is genuinely visible. Not bright, not the light of day, but a soft, collective luminescence falling over the rooftops and the fields and the river, giving the world below a faint, silver blue depth, a gentle visibility that is enough to move by, enough to see the shapes of things, enough to feel that the darkness is not empty but inhabited. The village is still. You walk through it slowly, your footsteps soft on the packed earth of the lane, and the stillness around you is not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of rest, of lives continuing quietly behind closed walls, of breathing slowed and bodies horizontal, and the mind released from the work of the day into the deeper, more private work of sleep. The reed mats hang motionless across the doorways. The courtyard walls rise on either side of the lane, their mud brick surfaces cool now to the touch. All the day's stored warmth given back to the night air. They glow faintly in the starlight, with the same pale luminosity as the whitewashed walls caught at the edge of dawn. Here and there, a small oil lamp burns. They are clay lamps, simple and functional, no larger than a cupped hand, a shallow bowl of pottery filled with linen oil, a twisted wick of plant fiber laid across the rim, producing a flame so small it is barely larger than a grain of wheat, a tiny, warm, amber point of light, visible through the gap at the edge of a reed mat, or through the high, narrow window of a house's inner room. These small flames do not compete with the darkness. They simply occupy their own small portion of it, steady and content, burning with the quiet patience of things that have a simple purpose and are fulfilling it without complaint. You pause at the edge of Nefru's courtyard. The gate is a simple wooden frame strung with palm fiber, and through it the courtyard is visible in its nighttime state. The banked fire, a barely perceptible glow in the clay hearth, a deep red almost entirely covered by its layer of ash, visible only as a faint warmth at the center of a gray circle, like the memory of a fire rather than a fire itself. The grinding stone is a gray shape against the wall. The storage jars stand in their quiet row, their sealed necks pale in the starlight. The acacia hoe leans where it was placed, unhurried and patient, waiting for the morning that will come and the work that will come with it. From inside the house, the sound of breathing, of lives continuing quietly behind closed walls, of breathing slowed and bodies horizontal, and the mind released from the work of the day into the deeper, more private work of sleep. The body doing only what it absolutely must. The mind gone somewhere private and unreachable. Nefru and her husband are asleep on their sleeping mats on the cool floor of the inner room. The child between them, in the way of small children who migrate toward the warmth of their parents in the night without waking. The room smells of the day's cooking, and the dried herbs hanging from the roof beam, and the particular warm, familiar smell of a family's shared sleep. Intimate and irreducible. Outside, the frogs are still singing. Their sound fills the night from the direction of the river, a vast, layered chorus of individual voices, so numerous and so continuous that they have long since ceased to be individual sounds and become simply the texture of the night itself, the audio equivalent of the starlight, present everywhere at once, surrounding everything without demanding anything. It is not a sound that disturbs sleep. It is a sound that deepens sleep, accompanies it, gives it a steady ground to rest upon. For anyone who has grown up beside this river, you walk toward the river. The path between the fields is silver gray in the starlight. The dark soil on either side reduced to shapes and textures. The barley, a soft, collective murmur of movement in the faint night breeze. Its sound barely more than a whisper, a suggestion of movement rather than movement itself. The date palms are silhouettes, patient, vertical, slightly swaying at their crowns, their fronds tracing slow arcs against the stars. The irrigation channels catch the starlight in long, still reflections that lie across the dark ground like fallen pieces of sky. And then you reach the river. The Nile at night is a different thing entirely from the Nile at midday, where the day's river is warm and golden and active, carrying boats, catching light, feeding channels. The night's river is wide and dark and supremely still, its surface barely distinguishable from the sky above it, so that standing at the bank in the starlight, you have the peaceful sensation of being suspended between two versions of the same darkness, the river reflecting the stars so perfectly that it is not entirely clear where the water ends and the night begins. The papyrus reeds at the bank's edge stir in the faint river breeze. Their stems make a dry, papery whispering sound, a sound so characteristic of this place, so interwoven with the smell of the water and the feel of the cool air rising off the current, that it seems less like a sound and more like the river's own quiet voice, saying something patient and long and untranslatable, in a language older than any human language, a language that speaks only of continuity and return, and the deep, reliable cycling of things. The flood will come again next year. The silt will settle over the fields again, dark and rich and full of everything the crops need, deposited without effort or instruction. The gift the river has been giving this valley for longer than human memory reaches. The barley will be sown again. The emmer wheat will rise again. Nefru will kneel at her grinding stone again in the pre-dawn quiet, and the flour will accumulate in its bowl, and the fire will be lit, and the smell of bread will move through the morning air. These things will happen because they have always happened, because the rhythm of this valley is so ancient and so deeply established that it continues not by effort but by nature. The way the river itself continues, the way the stars continue their slow rotation overhead each night, not because anyone asks them to, but because this is simply what they do, and what they will do. Long after this particular night has passed and been forgotten, you stand at the river's edge for a long, quiet moment. The water moves past you with a sound so subtle it is almost no sound at all, a barely perceptible shifting, a faint lapping at the reeds, the gentlest possible reminder that the river is alive and moving even now, even in this stillness, carrying its water and its silt from the mountains of the south toward the sea in the north, as it has done through every night of every year, since long before the first stone of the first pyramid was laid. Let that sound be the last thing you hold, that soft, continuous, ancient sound of water moving slowly in the dark, patient and unhurried, carrying everything gently forward, releasing everything gently downstream. Let it move through you the way the river moves through this valley, without effort, without urgency, without anything being asked of you at all. The village behind you sleeps. Nefru sleeps, her hands still faintly dusted with flour in the creases of her palms, her breathing slow and even and entirely at rest. The fire keeps its ember alive through the darkness. The stars complete their slow arc overhead. The frogs sing their ancient, continuous song at the water's edge, and the Nile moves on. Let your eyes close now. Let the sound of the water carry you. There is nothing left to do tonight but rest, here in this ancient, generous, endlessly patient valley, under a sky full of stars that have been watching over this river and everyone who has ever lived beside it since long before any of us arrived, and will continue watching long after we are gone. You are safe here. The night is soft and complete. Sleep now. Thank you for listening. New stories every week.